Barrister, after 4 years, are Nigerians better off than they were before the advent of the APC?
Well, to a very large extent, it's almost a mixed bag. One that does not just easily lend itself to one straitjacket interpretation. Essentially because we're all in this country in 2015 and we're here now. There were, and I'm sure there will continue to be a variety of challenges, different categories of obstacles. The capacity with which those obstacles were confronted differ from one to the other. But in the whole, what is important is that there were tremendous opportunity for greater improvement, for greater advancement in our nation building. That clearly did not happen. But that is not to discountenance the fact that we know precisely where we're coming from, including the fact of a very practical present threat to the territorial integrity of Nigeria, and so on and so forth. So you could say that Nigerians are terribly disappointed that, given the grand swell of optimism, the hopes that the emergence of the present administration held, the goodwill that it had, the disposition of the Nigerian people to support the government and lend all manner of assistance, were not justified. I mean, a lot of them were frittered away. And to that extent, one can easily see the resentment, justify the reservations, and then appraise the concern as they come.
Barrister, you talked about the resentments
Yes.
among Nigerians. Are Nigerians, despite these so-called resentments, ready for an alternative?
This is a very important.
President Behemot.
It's a very important question. Very, very important, because already the signs are suggesting, too early in the day, that whereas they may mount and voice their resentment, they don't seem to be a deliberate, conscious determination to exit the route and the circumstances that found them or placed them in this same situation.
Why is that?
A couple of factors are responsible, and it is not peculiar to our climb. It is present and prevalent in any society in which the people who ought to be the determinant factor have been relegated not just to the background, but have been made inconsequential in the political calculation of their society. Those factors range from issues of acute poverty, question of indiscipline, issue of lack of knowledge. Perhaps the one reinforces the other because the knowledge may be there, but the reality of your conditions dictates that you pretend as if you do not have the facts to deal with. You have the general political culture of the electorate, who are the followers. Then you have the overbearing and imposing economic factors. In all of what I have spoken about, you could see that the one leads to the other and they all reinforce one another. But let's put it more bluntly. It is to say that whereas a people clearly understand that they have no business with the level of the suffering they're going through, in a country heavily endowed beyond most other first, second world countries, yet they are almost always prepared to consolidate the conditions that lead to the surface, either economic conditions, political conditions, cultural conditions, behavioral conditions. And a people who accept any of those conditions will remain in the same quagmire that they found themselves before those conditions also existed. I give you a practical example. A people who are tired of a government and who are prepared to give effect to their resentment that you talk about will not behave in the way and manner that our people behaved in both Ekiti and Osun State, which are the most recent indicators of what may likely happen. Now, and it's also very instructive that these behavioral patterns played out in places like Ekiti and Osun State. In the political calculation of Nigeria, you do not discountenance the Southwest in terms of political sophistication. In the Southwest, you must look directly at the Ekiti-Ondo axis in trying to gauge the sophistication and the level of maturity, or political maturity as a people. Now, if it was convenient to railroad them into the kind of behavior that we found play out in those two states, you can only but imagine that the serious question of hunger, poverty, lack of jobs and productive engagement, and above all, the general frustration that leads a man take irrational decisions must have been at the heart of those kind of behavior. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not pretending as if we have forgotten the successive years of absence of governance, failure and absence of leadership, up to the point where a governor conceived, nurtured, delivered a very dangerous, if you like, kind of agenda termed stomach infrastructure. That stomach infrastructure was not just derogatory, it debased the humanity of our people and then threw up a reality that whereas you may be thinking of the fountain of knowledge that parades professors in virtually all families in that state, yet what counts is the extent of their hunger, is the extent to which hunger had debased them, devalued them, and dehumanized them. And at that point, you can as well say bye-bye to those doctorates and professorial qualifications. What matters is the tokenism, the stipends that you can dangle at any of them at any time and be sure and certain that they will follow your bidding. This is the reality.
Now, beyond the stomach infrastructure, the present politicians have now resorted to vote buying. Do we see these also playing out on a larger scale come 2019?
I have confirmed that what you saw in both Ekiti and Osun State, which was largely a replica of what we recorded in Anambra, Edo, and some other places, are early indicators. And it's unfortunate because whereas you may have an INEC that may be prepared, disposed to make improvements and work within the limits of the resources available to them, whereas you may have local and international observers who are prepared to raise the bars by their activities, whereas you may even have the political parties slip away their time instead of enlightening the electorate and ensuring that they shared some of these behavioral malfeasance. What is at the heart of what turns out are the issues we're discussing now. And the poverty of the situation is that it goes beyond the critical assessments and interpretation that we're presently offering. It speaks to the reality on the ground with respect to the electorate, not the elite, who understands what the stakes, what the issues are. It speaks to the exigency of survival of the electorate. Those electorates are largely persons and members of the same community, the same population, that see election, unfortunately, as perhaps the only time, the only exercise, the only program through which they can access illicit funds and money in the hands of the people they know have impoverished them. So in 4 years, they look up to these days mapped out for the exercise and are ready to do anything to access this money and then move on with their life. Now, this kind of behavior is also reinforced by the stories you hear, even with the primaries that have been conducted already. In the case of PDP, for instance, what was reported on national dailies and in the media generally can be, at best, scandalizing and frightening. Now, whether true or false, this same body of information, get down to these same electorates we talk about. That look, you are busy talking about transparent, free and fair election. When they meet at the level that they meet, they share as much as $9,000, $4,000, $5,000 as the case may be. These reports have not been effectively denied or repudiated. Yet, there is no corresponding response of the state by way of arrest, by way of investigation, that could easily lead and activate not just the Electoral Act, but other relevant criminal legislations, extant criminal legislations that would have enabled you to deal with these concrete situations in such a way that these electorates will see that as a state, we are opposed to this behavior. And as a state, the processes are already in place to serve as deterrent to people who may be disposed to behave in the same way. What that guarantees is the culture of impunity, is the continued practice of vote buying. Don't forget, in Ekiti State, it was, pay as you vote?
Exactly.
You show your PVC and identify where you put it. Now, when INEC creatively found a way around that, the practice was also continued in another form. So you already seen a people who are not just determined but resolved to continue the malfeasance of that practice for as long as the state has no way of dealing with that and punishing those activities. Impunity tribes.
That's ominous. I mean, now we're seeing an emergence of alternatives to these two hydra-headed behemoths. What are the chances of these so-called called alternatives. For example, we have the Omoyele African Action Congress, the Federal Party, and as well as Kingsley Mogalo Party. The why do these alternative parties stand a chance in these forthcoming elections? And if they do, what should they be doing at this point in time in order to mobilize Nigerians towards a change that Nigerians really dreamed of?
Now, please, this is another very important question that requires that one set a few backgrounds. First is that it can be done. Second is that the time is there, even if it's short. The third is that that is exactly what we need. But finally, and most importantly, it is to make the important point that what Nigerians need, what we all need, is an alternative to the present political class. And this fact did not just emerge yesterday. This fact has been what we need as a people. But unfortunately, we've not succeeded in building a consensus around that fact and pursuing it to a logical conclusion. The drawback of that is that we're already sounding discordant even to ourselves. Now, when I say the political class, I mean, that is even being charitable to them. When you talk of a class, you're talking of an organic, organized, purposeful entity focused on some noble objectives. So let's call them the political elite. Now, it is so because for upward of 40, 45 years, up to 50 years now, we've not seen a characterization of the political elite that distinguishes one category from the other. They are one and the same, and they make no pretenses about it. The only good news is that they have become weaker by the pretenses they throw out there, such that if our people are more organized and prepared to take the stage, the time would have been in 2015, earlier than that, but most opportune time is now. This calls to question the kind of energy that our people are dissipating. We must find a way, and that is responding to your question, of building a consensus around this reality and around this known fact of what we need. The more time we waste, the failure we experience in doing that, the more they consolidate and the more they rubbish the narrative that what we need is an alternative, which indeed is exactly what we need. An alternative to a totally inept political elite, political class, totally corrupt political class, a class that has no clue of, to the, myriads of crises, political challenges that Nigeria is facing at the moment. But to do that is not a tea party. It requires not just the strength of an individual or a group of individuals. It calls for a coalition, a very robust coalition, but clear-headed coalition with a very firm understanding of what the issues are, with their hands on those issues, a firm grip of those issues, and drive this country that is moving perilously towards chaos. For these aspirants that you have mentioned, many of whom are our colleagues, they must be broad-minded. They must see it as a Nigerian project, not a Kingsley or Showore or obvious Ekosilis or Durocha's project. And that would immediately rekindle or activate the need for the kind of coalition that is required to fight this movement. I give you the final example to say that, look, all of these people you have mentioned, in varying degrees, have had cause to intervene in the course of our national journey and nation building. Comrade Showore will tell you that at different critical times and curves in our struggle, it became necessary not to go it alone, but to build coalitions. This was why you had CD, Campaign for Democracy. You had JACON. I was the National Deputy Secretary of JACON under Ganifo Ami, straight from the university, with people like Showore very much around. We had UAD. Today you have JAF, and so on and so forth. These coalitions have always been very necessary at such critical times when you need to confront a bigger problem. The problem today, just as it was the military in the past, is the political elite. And we have identified that the answer is to provide an alternative. If you don't provide this alternative, which is where we are at the moment, the danger is that the people in whom the sovereignty of this country lies, pursuant to Section 14, Subsection 2B of the Constitution, will remain rudderless. They will not know where to go to. They will even see where to go to, but have no faith to travel in that direction. It is precisely why these other parties must find a way to build a consensus around the potentials of collapsing their structures. Now, the danger in that, because I must not run away from, is that many of them also suffer the same headache that have been associated even with the political class. I'm talking about the absence of clear ideological direction of these other groupings different from the identified political class. And therefore, the fear, the concern of those who would have wished that this coalition is built is, to what extent can I now begin to collaborate with people whom I know are just posturing to be able to have a space with a view to joining the same political class that we're all trying to change. This, I know, is a challenge, but look, it is not so much about us. It is about the degree of sacrifice that we want to profile, and in the process subdue that which may be personal interest to raise the Nigerian question well above those considerations.
Now, a major argument given by people who agree with this analysis that you have just analyzed, but unfortunately are currently using their time and energy to elect the status quo party, is that there's a very remote chance that these so-called alternatives can win elections come 2019. The bottom line, and what Nigerians are wondering, is how can they actually take their destiny in their hand to hold their leaders accountable if these ones cannot win? I mean, and to actually take back power from this, so the governments that have failed them.
These are very, very tested questions you are throwing at me. And we must be very sincere as we try to respond to this question, because the solution lies in an in-depth understanding of what the issues are. Now, what is happening is good. It is good because until it is tried, many people are wont to believe that you can do it through processes that are otherwise less rigorous. I say they are good because at the end of it all, we'll go back to where we left off. It's unfortunate that many of us spent our adolescent and early adult age struggling, re-struggle made the kind of sacrifices that would have seen us cross the present hurdles, and yet it's not happening. That is not to say that others did not die in the process. So there are degrees of sacrifices, and it will continue, for which reason we insist that the struggle will continue. Because the only thing left is further improvement to humanity. Having said that, where we left off was to go back to the trenches. I'm not talking about demonstrations and protests. No. I'm talking about deliberate, conscious mobilization of the Nigerian people, particularly the young and the youth. And you don't do that in 2 years, 3 years. We started off very well, up to the point where this country was fully calibrated. But it coincided with the wrong battle, which is the battle to disengage the military. If we had dissipated that same energy with equal zeal and zest and energy towards a political struggle, we would have been better off. But we can't keep looking backwards when we're intent on going forward. What I think we can do is to go back to our constituencies. I said Nigeria was fully calibrated. The critical mass, the critical segment of the Nigerian population was fully calibrated. The students, under the leadership, up to people like Showore at the level of NANS, Mayegun, Okewo, and so on and so forth. There were moments in this country when it fell on the students, not ASU, not Labour, to determine and give a direction in this country. SAP was one of such. I wasn't an undergraduate then, but I could tell, being a very conscious person, that this whole thing was nipped by students, and it was masterfully done. National issues. There were no social media then, but people were able to coordinate themselves and sincerely and genuinely articulate a position that liberated a country from that bogus policy. Labour was by far more coherent, by far more effective, by far more result-oriented than they are at the moment. The academia became a critical that got to the point where they were providing professional, intellectual expertise to other. I mean, I'm the national president of CDHR today. I can tell of not less than 100 members, very hot heads, eggheads in the academia, straight from ASU, who were given technical resource base for very progressive civil society. CDHR, one of them, such that when you had to, you could see the connection, you could see the communality of purpose, you could see that consensus radiating from labor to media, media to students, students to civil society, all directed towards reshaping this country. It was happening in labor, it was happening in ASU, NMA. Under Falomo, the same Dr. Falomo, and a host of others, you had a society that was fully charged for the real progress, not driven by money. We need to go back to that stage and start building again. Now, the reason why that must be so is that when you go back to these recruitment centers, to the universities, to the polytechnics, hardly would you see the kind of ideals, the kind of philosophy, the kind of principles, the integrity quotient, the intellectual depth that sustained and threw up people like us.
Now, Barrister, finally, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to the Nigerian youths at this time, what will it be, sir?
That would be that this future to be ushered in by this 2000 election is actually in their hands. And it is not a mere cliche. It is that they have the opportunity, they have the privilege, and they have the responsibility to ensure that this future is not frittered away and thrown overboard. And therefore, they need to be circumspect, a bit more circumspect. They need to find a consensus around the question of providing alternative. We recognize that they alone cannot do it, but they must, align forces, build forces with the progressives to ensure that the alternative needed to show these people the exit door will be guaranteed.
Barrister, thank you very much for insightful analysis. We appreciate it.